I still remember the way his voice sliced through the air, polished, practiced, and completely devoid of empathy. "Ruth," he said, "today will be your last day." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. The fluorescent lights above the conference table hummed faintly, the kind of sterile hum that fills corporate offices where people pretend to be calm while destroying someone else's life. My heart didn't race. It froze. 25 years of service, loyalty, sacrifice, reduced to a single sanitized sentence. Dominic Hayes, our new managing partner, sat across from me with his sleek suit, perfect tie knot, and a face trained for boardrooms, not humanity. He'd joined Franklin and Associates only 8 months ago, a man who measured worth by numbers, not names. I tried to breathe to make my voice sound steady. After 25 years, he smiled faintly like he'd practiced this too. Business decisions aren't personal. That line, I would hear it again in my dreams, echoing through empty corridors of memory. He slid a manila folder across the glass table, my severance package. 2 months of pay, continuation of benefits, the usual corporate condolences. Beside him, Janice from HR avoided eye contact, nodding along to words she didn't believe. She was there to humanize the inhumane, to soften the edges of betrayal. They said it wasn't a reflection of my performance. But deep down, I knew what it was. I was 58 years old too. Experience too expensive, too loyal to play the political games the new leadership admired. I asked, "Does Arthur know Arthur Franklin? The man who had hired me 25 years ago. The founding partner who built the firm from nothing but ambition and idealism." Dominic's jaw tightened. All partners were consulted. An obvious lie. Arthur was in London chasing an international expansion deal. They had waited until he was gone. Dominic ended the meeting with a hollow smile. "Best of luck in your future endeavors. Security will escort you to your desk." Security. After 25 years, I was suddenly a potential threat. As I gathered my things, the humiliation washed over me in waves so cold I could barely feel my hands. I watched the same halls I had walked for decades blur before my eyes, the same carpet I'd chosen during the last renovation, the same framed photos of client awards I'd fought to win. I was the one who had built the department they were now restructuring. At my desk, I packed quietly. The crystal paperweight Arthur gave me on my 20th anniversary. A framed photo from the Chambers family gala. A stack of handwritten thank you notes from clients who had trusted me through mergers, lawsuits, and crises. As I tucked the last photo into the box, my phone buzzed a message from Catherine Winters, CEO of Winters Healthcare, our largest client. "Ruth, hearing rumors about changes at F&A. Our quarterly reviews next week. Call me ASAP." I glanced up to see Dominic watching me from his glass office phone pressed to his ear. Damage control, no doubt. What none of them understood was simple relationships aren't assets you can transfer in a memo. They're earned, nurtured, protected. They take years of trust and one careless decision to destroy. My name is Ruth Pearson, and for 25 years I was the Senior Director of Client Relations at Franklin and Associates, one of Boston's premier consulting firms. I helped build it from a scrappy 2-room office into an empire of marble lobbies and million-dollar accounts. Now I was being erased from its history. When I first joined in 1998, Arthur was 42, charming, brilliant, and unshakably driven. He used to say numbers are the language of business, Ruth, but relationships are its heart. I believed him. For years I built that heart beat by beat. I remembered every client's name, every anniversary, every child's graduation. I called them during losses, celebrated their wins, sent handwritten notes when their firms merged or their parents passed away. I made sure that Franklin and Associates wasn't just another consulting firm, we were their people. Arthur once told me at my 20th anniversary dinner, "You're the relationship architect, Ruth. You built the foundation we all stand on." But 2 years ago, everything changed. When we took on outside investors, I could feel it, the air shifted. Suddenly, there were new faces in every corner office, Harvard MBAs with spreadsheets instead of souls. Efficiency, optimization metrics, words that became our gospel. Dominic Hayes arrived shortly after, tall, polished, magnetic in a reptilian way. He called himself a modernizer, but what he really was a dismantler. He didn't see people, he saw profit margins. Under his watch, turnover rose by nearly 40%. The old motto, "clients first," quietly morphed into maximum value extraction. I'd raised my concerns during executive meetings. "We're sacrificing long-term trust for short-term profit," I warned. Dominic smiled, that corporate smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. The market is changing, Ruth. Adapt or die. In the months that followed, I was quietly excluded from meetings. My name disappeared from email threads. Junior partners began showing up on my client calls, shadowing, they said. Eventually, they started calling my clients without me. I knew then they were phasing me out. Still, I believed Arthur would protect me. I'd been his right hand for years, the steady voice that kept clients anchored when crises hit. Catherine Winters alone brought in nearly $4 million a year, and she'd made it clear in her last contract renewal that she worked with me, not the firm. But loyalty doesn't mean much when your signature is no longer on the contracts. The week before my termination, I overheard Dominic on the phone outside the break room. This restructuring will let us trim the legacy fat. Those retirement packages will cost us millions. Legacy fat, that was me. I wish I could say I was surprised when he said the words in that conference room, "Today will be your last day." But the truth is, betrayal rarely comes without warning. It's a slow leak, small moments of neglect that you try to patch with faith until there's nothing left but silence and the sound of it all collapsing. 3 days later, I sat in my apartment surrounded by half-empty boxes, my crystal paperweight gleaming dully in the light of my laptop. Job boards, LinkedIn messages, empty words like, "Let's stay in touch." After 25 years, I'd become a headline veteran executive leaves Franklin and Associates amid restructuring. That's what they called it. Restructuring. The phone rang. My landline, a relic like me. Ruth. Arthur's voice, British familiar, warm. But tonight there was tension behind it. I just landed from London. I heard the news. This wasn't authorized by me. 1,000 emotions tangled in my chest. Relief, anger, disbelief. It happened anyway, I said flatly. Dominic told me all partners approved. I was deliberately sidelined, Arthur replied, his voice tight. They waited until I was out of the country. The executive committee forced it through to improve quarterly projections before the investor meeting. After 25 years, Arthur, a 10-minute meeting, a security escort. You deserved better, he whispered. Let me make it right. I'll bring you back. We'll call it a misunderstanding. It's not that simple, I said quietly. Dominic made it clear I'm dispensable. I could hear the guilt in Arthur's silence. When I hung up, my phone immediately started lighting up calls, messages, notifications, clients reaching out. Catherine Winters, Douglas from Archer Pharmaceuticals, Belinda from Summit Financial. All of them asking the same question. Ruth, what happened? I hadn't said a word publicly. But clients talk. They meet at conferences, sit on the same boards, exchange whispers over dinners. My phone became a confession booth. Everyone wanted to know the truth. Then came the letter hand-delivered by courier. A thick envelope from Catherine Goldstein, one of Boston's top headhunters. Heard what happened at F&A. Several firms are interested. Dinner tomorrow. I stared at the note for a long time, a quiet fire starting to burn in my chest. Dominic thought he'd saved money by cutting legacy fat. What he didn't realize was that he'd just severed the arteries that kept the firm alive. And the woman they discarded, was about to prove exactly that. The night after the letter arrived, I sat by my window long past midnight, the city lights bleeding into the darkness like restless thoughts that refused to fade. For the first time in decades, my phone wasn't buzzing with client messages, deadlines, or strategy memos. There was only silence, thick, unfamiliar, and terrifying. I kept replaying that moment in the conference room. The polished table, Dominic's indifferent face, the sterile language of betrayal wrapped in corporate politeness. Every time I thought I'd stop reliving it, another detail surfaced: the faint hum of the air conditioner, the way Janice from HR refused to look at me, the absurdity of being escorted out of the building I helped build. You don't realize how much of your identity is tied to your work until someone rips it away. My title had been more than a job. It was proof that my sacrifices meant something. The late nights, the weekends, the birthdays I'd missed. I told myself it was for stability, for reputation, for legacy. But as I sat alone staring at my reflection in the glass, I realized something painful. I'd been loyal to an idea that no longer existed. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:38 a.m. I didn't recognize the number until I heard her voice. Tell me you're not actually gone. Catherine Winters never wasted time on greetings. Her tone carried that sharpness only self-made women had, the kind born from years of carving space in rooms that weren't designed for them. "I'm afraid I am," I replied, pouring coffee with a hand that trembled just slightly. "Restructuring," she scoffed. "That's what they called it. I've worked with you exclusively for 12 years. Melissa Bennett emailed me yesterday to introduce herself. That girl tried to explain my own business model to me last year." I smiled faintly despite myself. "Franklin and Associates is making strategic changes, Catherine. I'm sure they believe it's in their client's best interest." "Don't give me the corporate line, Ruth," she snapped. "We've known each other too long for that." There was a pause, softer, more personal. "Where are you going next?" "I haven't decided yet." "Well, decide quickly. Our contract's up for renewal in 60 days. I'd prefer to follow you." Her words hung in the air like an electric current. Follow me. Professional instinct told me to deflect, to remain loyal to the firm even after being discarded. But something deeper, older, more human in me refused. "I appreciate your confidence, Catherine," I said quietly. "Let me explore my options and get back to you." When the call ended, I set my mug down, my heart beat loud in the quiet room. That one conversation had shifted something fundamental. For years, I'd believed that the firm was my identity, that I only had power through its name. But in that moment, I understood my power was never in their logo. It was in the trust I'd built, name by name, handshake by handshake. By noon, I'd received 5 more calls. By dinner, 11. Every one of them said the same thing. "We want to work with you wherever you go." I hadn't made a single move, and yet a silent exodus had begun. That night, I met with Catherine Goldstein, the headhunter, at a quiet restaurant in Back Bay. She was the kind of woman who could read a person's ambition in their posture. Her eyes studied me over reading glasses as she stirred her martini. "You're the talk of the industry," she said. "Dominic Hayes made a catastrophic mistake." I shrugged, careful to keep my expression neutral. "Perhaps." She laughed. "Always diplomatic. That's part of your appeal." Then she slid a folder across the table. "3 firms want to meet with you. 2 are ready to create a position specifically to bring you and your client relationships on board." I opened the folder. My breath caught. Compensation figures that nearly doubled what I'd earned before. "They're not just paying for your expertise," Catherine said, leaning back. "They're paying for your little black book." The irony was almost poetic. I'd been labeled too costly legacy fat, and now I was suddenly worth twice as much to everyone else. When I returned home, I sat in the dark, my mind a whirl of names, memories, and possibilities. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I just wanted dignity, the quiet kind that comes from standing up without raising your voice. The next day, Arthur called again. His tone was brisk but uneasy. "Ruth, I need to see you. Lunch at the Harvest. 1 o'clock, please." For a moment I considered refusing, but curiosity won. At precisely 1, I walked into the restaurant. Arthur was already there, looking more worn than I'd ever seen him. His hair grayer, his eyes lined with fatigue. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I've been trying to fix this, but Dominic is blocking me. He convinced the board your termination was necessary to modernize operations." I folded my hands, saying nothing. Arthur exhaled. "The clients aren't taking it well. Catherine Winters demanded a meeting with the executive team. Douglas from Archer is reconsidering their contract. 3 smaller clients have already left." I sipped my water slowly, letting the silence stretch. "Here's what I'm proposing," Arthur said, leaning forward. "I'll create a new position, Chief Client Officer. You'll report directly to me, bypass Dominic entirely. Better pay, more autonomy." It sounded perfect. Too perfect. I studied his face, the tremor in his hands, the desperation behind his smile. "What aren't you telling me, Arthur?" He hesitated. Then the truth spilled out. "Dominic's been consolidating power. He's building alliances with the new partners. If client losses continue, he'll use it to force me into early retirement. I need your help to stabilize things." I felt something cold and clean wash through me, clarity. He wasn't trying to save me. He was trying to save himself. "I'm sorry, Arthur," I said, pushing back my chair. "But I already have meetings scheduled with other firms." "Ruth, please." I stood, looked him in the eye, and said the same words Dominic had used on me. "Business decisions aren't personal." The look on his face almost made the entire humiliation worth it. Almost. Over the next week, I met with all 3 firms Catherine had introduced. Each one wanted the same thing: my relationships, my insight, my reputation. They offered offices, budgets, teams. One of them, Blackwell Consulting, felt different, smaller, more human. The way Franklin and Associates used to be before ambition swallowed its heart. Their offer was extraordinary, a full equity partnership. For the first time in my life, I would own part of what I built. Meanwhile, word spread fast. The industry blogs began whispering about Franklin and Associates' client unrest, leadership tension, Dominic's rumored arrogance. My former assistant Thomas texted me updates almost daily. Catherine Winters met with the exec team, left furious. Archer canceled their quarterly review. Even Westridge is shopping for competitors. Each message was another crack in the foundation Dominic thought he'd strengthened. Then came the call that changed everything. Miss Pearson. This is Jeffrey Hammond from the Boston Business Journal. His tone was polite, practiced. I'm working on a story about recent leadership changes at Franklin and Associates. Several sources mentioned your name. Would you be willing to comment? My pulse quickened. One wrong word could breach my severance agreement. I'm not comfortable discussing internal matters, I said carefully. Understandable, he replied. But are you aware that 7 major clients have announced plans to terminate their contracts? Sources say this exodus is directly tied to your departure. 7. I hadn't even spoken to half of them. I can't speak to clients' business decisions, I said, though my throat tightened. One last thing, he added. There's a letter circulating signed by 26 clients, demanding that Arthur Franklin replace Dominic Hayes as managing partner. I froze. My hand trembled as I gripped the phone. I have no knowledge of such a letter, I managed to say. When I hung up, I sat in stunned silence. 26 clients, an organized demand. I hadn't orchestrated any of it. I hadn't needed to. They were doing it on their own. My phone buzzed Thomas again. Emergency all-hands meeting tomorrow morning. Dominic looks like he's about to have a stroke. For the first time since that humiliating afternoon, I smiled. Not out of spite, but out of justice, quietly unfolding not by my hand, but by the simple weight of truth. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spinning between disbelief and a quiet, dangerous satisfaction. 26 clients, almost 70% of Franklin and Associates' revenue base, had demanded Dominic's removal. The same man who'd called me legacy fat was now choking on the legacy he'd tried to erase. I didn't do this. That was the strange, beautiful irony of it all. I hadn't plotted, called, or manipulated. I'd simply stepped away, and nature corrected itself. Trust once broken never floats. It sinks straight to the source of the wound. And at Franklin and Associates, the wound was him. At 10:34 p.m., Arthur called. He didn't even say hello. Did you organize this client revolt? I laughed softly, though it wasn't amusement, it was exhaustion wrapped in irony. Arthur, I've done nothing. I haven't solicited a single client. Then how do you explain this? He demanded, his voice trembling between fear and disbelief. 70% of our clients are threatening to leave. The board is in chaos. Investors are panicking. Dominic's name is poison. Maybe I interrupted gently. They value relationships more than efficiency. Silence. Then his voice cracked. This isn't a joke, Ruth. 25 years of building this firm, and it could collapse in 25 days. I didn't gloat, though. Part of me wanted to. He sounded so small, so unsure, the same man who'd once stood on a stage and called me the architect of our client trust. What do you want from me, Arthur? I finally asked. Come back, he said. The words tumbled out like a plea. Not as chief client officer, as a full equity partner. Help me stabilize this before it's too late. Partner. The word echoed in my head like a long-forgotten promise. For years, I'd dreamed of that recognition of a seat at the table where I belonged. And now, only because everything had burned to ashes, the invitation arrived. What about Dominic? I asked quietly. The board meets tonight, he said. His fate will be decided before tomorrow's all-hands meeting. I hung up with a promise to think about it, though my mind was already racing. I stood by the window as dawn began to light the skyline, streaking Boston's glass towers in pale gold. It should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was heavy. Returning meant walking back into the same building that had humiliated me, facing the same people who'd watched me escorted out in silence. Could I ever trust that place again? I thought of Blackwell Consulting, the offer still open, the partnership waiting. There was something clean about it. New walls, new colleagues, no ghosts. A chance to build again, not to resurrect what had died. By 6 a.m., my decision was made. I called Catherine Goldstein. "I'm going with Blackwell," I said simply. "I thought you might," she replied, her tone bright with approval. "They'll be thrilled." "There's one condition," I added. When I explained it, she laughed low, delighted, a sound like glass clinking. "Ruthless Ruth. I love it. I'll handle it personally." At 8:45 the next morning, I walked into Franklin and Associates for the first time since my firing. The same security guard was on duty. His eyes widened, but he said nothing, just nodded stiffly as if unsure whether to salute or hide. The reception area looked exactly the same, but it felt different. The air was tense, brittle. You could taste panic in the silence. Staff moved quickly, avoiding eye contact, as though a single glance might pull them into the storm brewing upstairs. When I entered the elevator, my reflection stared back at me, older, sharper, but calm. I didn't feel like the woman who had left in tears. I felt like someone else entirely. The conference room was already full. Partners who usually attended via Zoom had flown in overnight. Junior staff lined the walls, clutching notebooks. Arthur stood at the front beside two board members, his expression a fragile mask of control. Dominic's chair sat empty. Arthur began, voice measured. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we've faced unprecedented client concerns following recent staffing changes." His gaze flicked toward me. Conversations in the room stilled. "I'm pleased to announce," he continued, "that Ruth Pearson has agreed to return to Franklin and Associates as a full equity partner leading our newly formed client relations division." A murmur rippled through the room, surprise, relief, confusion. I saw Thomas near the back give me a subtle thumbs up. Arthur raised his hand for silence. "Additionally, the board has unanimously voted to remove Dominic Hayes as managing partner effective immediately. His approach was deemed inconsistent with the firm's values." For a second there was stunned stillness, then quiet clapping, hesitant but genuine. The sound swelled like cautious hope. Arthur turned toward me, smiling. "Ruth, would you like to say a few words?" Every eye turned to me. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over my shoulders. My pulse was steady. My voice, when it came, was calm, too calm. "Thank you, Arthur," I began. "I appreciate the offer to return as partner." A pause, silence sharpened around me. "However, I need to clarify something important." Arthur's smile faltered. "I'm not coming back to Franklin and Associates." You could feel the collective intake of breath. Heads turned, whispers erupted, but I didn't stop. "I've accepted a partnership at Blackwell Consulting," I continued. "They've just finalized acquisition negotiations with Horizon Capital to purchase a controlling interest in Franklin and Associates." The words hit the room like thunder. A dozen voices erupted. Arthur's face drained of color. "The transition will begin next week," I said evenly, waiting for the noise to subside. "Blackwell has no intention of mass layoffs or restructuring, unless of course they're deemed necessary for efficiency." Arthur stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Ruth, what have you done?" "I haven't done anything, Arthur. Blackwell's been planning a Boston expansion for years. Horizon Capital was happy to sell, especially after the recent instability." I smiled faintly, repeating his own creed back to him. "It's just business, nothing personal." The realization dawned across his face like slow dawn over wreckage. He understood. He'd failed to protect me when it mattered. He'd allowed loyalty to be treated as liability, and now he was learning the true cost. The meeting dissolved into chaos, voices, overlapping chairs, scraping the once proud firm, unraveling in real time. I walked out without looking back. In the elevator, my phone buzzed. A message from Catherine Winters. "Just heard the news. Dinner tonight to discuss Winters Healthcare's future with Blackwell Franklin." I smiled. For the first time in months, it wasn't a forced smile. It was quiet, honest satisfaction, the kind born not from revenge but from balance restored. The next morning, the Boston Business Journal broke the headline, "Consulting Shakeup: Blackwell Acquires Franklin and Associates After Client Exodus." The article detailed everything: Dominic's fall, the investor panic, the acquisition that no one saw coming. My name appeared once buried deep in the 15th paragraph. "Ruth Pearson, former senior director of client relations at F&A, has accepted a partnership at Blackwell and will oversee the integration of Franklin's client portfolios." Just one line, but it was enough. I didn't need a headline. I'd become the quiet force beneath it. Within 3 weeks, I had gone from being escorted out by security to sitting in the corner office that overlooked the same skyline I used to view as an employee. Only this time, the view belonged to me. I never raised my voice, never plotted revenge. I simply walked away, and the truth did the rest. The weeks following the acquisition passed in a strange blur of motion and quiet power. For the first time in years, I no longer woke to dread. Instead, I woke to purpose, the kind that didn't come from obligation, but from choice. Blackwell Franklin Consulting, that was the new name. The merger had been completed in record time, and suddenly I was sitting on the executive floor again. Not as someone's subordinate, not as the old hand to be pushed aside, but as a partner, a voice that mattered. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same firm that had treated me like a relic was now under my oversight. Not through vengeance, but through gravity, the natural pull of competence, back to where it belonged. My first weeks were consumed with integration meetings, transition plans, and endless negotiations. Yet amid the chaos, something remarkable happened. People began coming to me. Old colleagues, nervous about their futures, knocking on my door with tentative smiles. Ms. Pearson. They'd start, some out of habit, some out of shame. I just wanted to say I always respected your work. I didn't agree with how they handled things. I didn't offer them anger or pity, only professionalism. Then let's make sure we do better this time, I'd reply. Because that was the truth. I wasn't here to destroy Franklin and Associates. I was here to rebuild what Dominic had hollowed out. Arthur requested a meeting about a week after the announcement. I agreed, though I wasn't sure why. Perhaps closure. Perhaps curiosity. When he arrived at my new office, my corner office not far from where his used to be, I could tell the last month had aged him. His suit hung looser. His eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness. He looked less like the visionary founder I once admired, and more like a man who had outlived his own principles. He sat down heavily across from me. You orchestrated this. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, brittle, almost desperate. No, Arthur, I said quietly. I simply recognized my own value. You and Dominic were the ones who didn't. He exhaled sharply, the sound half frustration, half regret. Dominic was a symptom, he said, not the disease. And the disease was neglect, I said, leaning forward. You let the culture rot from within. You chased growth over gratitude, numbers over names. You forgot that trust is not a metric you can measure on a quarterly report. He looked down at his hands, and now you control it all. Not control, I corrected. Influence, there's a difference, one you used to understand. I slid a folder across the table. Blackwell is offering you a 3-year consulting position. Advisory only, no management duties. It's generous considering the circumstances. He didn't touch it, and if I refuse, then you walk away with your buyout, I said, meeting his eyes. Nothing more. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. It wasn't hostility that filled the silence. It was history. 25 years of trust, pride, and eventual betrayal compacted into a single shared breath. Finally, Arthur reached for the folder. You always were the smartest person in the room, he murmured. No, I said, just the one who never stopped listening. When he left, I didn't feel victorious, only resolved. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, methodical, the steady balancing of scales long tilted by arrogance. 6 months later, Blackwell Franklin Consulting occupied 2 glittering floors in a downtown high-rise. The new logo, silver against black marble, gleamed in the lobby. I often paused to look at it, not out of vanity, but out of gratitude. It was proof that patience, not vengeance, had rewritten my ending. The integration had gone smoother than anyone predicted. I'd insisted on keeping most of Franklin's staff. Many of them had been casualties of poor leadership, not incompetence. When given space and trust, they thrived again. Client retention exceeded 95%. The 3 major accounts that had left during the upheaval quietly returned within months. Our quarterly revenue was up 23% year over year. Dominic, I heard, had resurfaced at a much smaller firm in New Hampshire, a step down in every possible sense. His name, once synonymous with innovation, was now shorthand for overreach. And Arthur. He'd accepted the consulting role. Our paths still crossed occasionally, but the warmth that once existed between us had cooled into formal civility. Betrayal doesn't always end in anger. Sometimes it just settles into silence. One Friday morning, my assistant knocked softly on my office door. Ms. Pearson, Ms. Winters is here for lunch. I smiled. Send her in. Catherine strode in, elegant as always, her tailored suit immaculate, her energy effortless. She took one look at me and grinned. Congratulations on the quarterly results, she said. You've done what the entire industry thought was impossible, a merger without chaos. I laughed. It wasn't a takeover, Catherine. It was a market correction. She chuckled, shaking her head. Call it what you want. You prove something I've always believed in this business. The real assets aren't systems or strategies. They're relationships. I nodded. They always were. As we walked out together, the elevator doors opened to reveal the city skyline, a cascade of glass and steel reflecting the afternoon sun. I remembered my first day at Franklin decades ago. The nervous excitement. The conviction that hard work and loyalty could build something unbreakable. I'd been naive then, but perhaps that kind of faith is necessary at the beginning of every story. We sat at a corner table in the same restaurant where I'd met Arthur months before. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The air smelled faintly of citrus and champagne. You know, Catherine said as she raised her glass, you could have gone for revenge. You could have destroyed them completely. I smiled softly. I didn't have to. They destroyed themselves the moment they forgot what truly mattered. She nodded. Still, you turned that destruction into opportunity. That takes a rare kind of strength. Maybe it did, or maybe it just took remembering who I was before I let that firm define me. When I looked out at the skyline that afternoon, I saw not conquest, but balance. A full circle quietly closing. I hadn't planned revenge. I hadn't plotted a coup. I'd simply walked away with my integrity intact, and the world had rearranged itself around that truth. Sometimes karma isn't fire and fury. Sometimes it's stillness, the slow unraveling of lies until only truth remains. When I left Franklin and Associates that day months ago, I thought my story had ended. But endings, I've learned, aren't always losses. Sometimes they're beginnings written in disguise. To anyone who's ever been discarded, dismissed, or replaced, remember this: your value doesn't disappear when someone stops seeing it. It waits quietly until you see it yourself again. And when you do, everything changes. So if you're still listening, if you've stayed with me through all of this, I want you to take something with you. Never measure your worth by the title they take away. Measure it by the strength it takes to rebuild, because sometimes the greatest revenge is peace. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated only to rise higher because of it? I'd love to hear your story.